Following Jesus isn't easy. I guess Jesus never promises it will be. The journey seems long, and there's a lot of distractions along the way. It's hard to keep pushing against the current all the time. Fact is, I'm getting tired. I'm just not enjoying things at the moment. So I'm just going to go with the flow for a while, not take things so seriously. It's okay, you don't need to worry about me. My Christian friends are worried about me. They think I'm going to drift away. They're so uptight. I'm not going to turn my back on Jesus. I know what I believe. I'm not going anywhere fast. But you know, I'm starting to enjoy life again. There's a lot of good things to see out here. And it's nice to see how other people live. I'm not going to be here for long. It's just a chance to refresh for a while. Okay, maybe test the waters a little bit. But there's nowhere out of God's reach. I can go back anytime. What am I saying? I don't need to go back. I haven't gone anywhere. And I don't plan to go anywhere either.
Hebrews chapter 2. I want you to turn there if you would. Hebrews chapter 2. Sailing into 2020. Wow, can you believe it's 2020? Oh, me neither. That's crazy. Crazy. But I want to talk to you about a new year. Because we're on the threshold of something. We don't know what, right? We don't know. Jesus could come again, right? 2020 could be the year. He may not. Not sure everything that's going to happen. There's no way that you and I can dictate or even predict everything that's going to happen. Because life is like an ocean, isn't it? Those currents, those waves, those ships sailing in a lot of different directions. And we're going to have opportunities in 2020. Don't know exactly what they are, but we are. We're going to have some heartaches. Some things are going to happen that we didn't plan on. Some pain is going to happen in probably every person's life in this building. There are going to be some tears, I would feel assured. So we're really sailing into a new year on an uncharted sea. So I think Hebrews 2:1, and I want us to read it. For this reason, listen to what he says. For this reason, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away from it. Verse 2 says this, for if the word spoken through angels proved unalterable, and every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty, and underline these in your copy of the Scriptures, How will we escape if we neglect so great salvation? And after it was at the first spoken through the Lord, it was confirmed to us. It was confirmed to us by those who heard it. Now listen, what I've just read to you, whether you realize it or not, is a scene from the sea. The writer of Hebrews is using this nautical term and terminology. He must be a mariner. Because what he's talking about here is bringing a ship into a harbor. Do you see the part? Paying much closer attention. One translation says giving more earnest heed. Scholars tell us he's talking about a ship getting into a harbor. You see, a ship doesn't drift into the harbor. It takes skill and practice to get that done. Read it. The last part of verse 1 says, so we do not drift away. This is done so that we don't drift away from it. You have to be careful. You have to be careful that you don't end up on the rocks. And if you're a good sailor, you're going to make sure you don't drift past the harbor. Missed my turn. See, there's a danger of drifting. There's this danger of an aimless life. The worst thing that can happen for you, for me, for anyone in 2020 is that we just kind of drift along. The worst thing that can happen to Northwest Baptist Church is that we just kind of drift along. Let's just drift along. That doesn't work out. If we just let this year happen to us, instead of finding a course and charting a course and getting into God's appointed harbor. And so here's some help with that. You want a little help with that? Let me give you a little help with that. We need to determine a fixed direction. I didn't give you a listening guide this morning, so you might want to take a note. We need to determine a fixed direction because drifting is one of the easiest things that we do. Now, what causes drifting, you say? Thanks. Glad you asked. Winds, right? Winds can cause us to drift. Currents can cause drifting. There's those tides that can cause you to drift. There are those winds of worldliness. There are the currents of the old nature. There's the tides of circumstance. And by the way, we don't decide to drift. It's the natural occurrence if we don't have a fixed direction. There is in your life and in my life a constant pull away from God. Have you noticed this? Or is it just me? Have you not noticed that there is a constant pull away from the things that are godly? It's true of everybody in this building. It's true of you this morning. If you've made a resolution to attend church, get ready. There will be something that takes place next Sunday morning that will blow you out of the water. If this week you've made a commitment to studying the Word of God and to reading the Word of God, there will be a constant pull away from that commitment that you've made. It's just like the pull of gravity on you right now. It's causing every muscle in your body to sag. Somebody say amen to that. There's this pull of the old nature, the winds of circumstance and the winds of carnality that will cause you to drift. That's why the writer of Hebrews said we need to pay close attention. Listen to what he said. We need to pay close attention or we'll drift past God's appointed harbor. Any history buffs here today? You remember a guy by the name of William Perry? He was an explorer. You may remember in your high school history lessons, he explored the Arctic. He made his way to the North Pole, and now he was taking measurements by the stars. He was finding what progress he was making day after day after day. They journeyed and they measured. They were heading north, but when they measured, they were further south than they were the day before. They're moving north, but somehow they're heading south. Puzzled, and then finally the mystery solved. What was happening is that they were on an ice floe, and that ice floe was heading south, even though they were walking north. Let me ask you a question. Is it possible that we live in a world that's drifting south and we're headed north? Is it possible even in your own life to be headed north but still drifting south? Most of the time we don't even realize what's happening. The things we allow in our lives, the things that we watch, the things that we give precedence to in our lives, the society that we're in, it has a pull away from God. Listen, drifting is it's a very determined thing. Drifting is a very deceptive thing. Drifting is a very dangerous thing. If you let a ship drift, it's just a matter of time before you end up in trouble. It's just a matter of time before you're on the rocks, on the reefs, or you're lost at sea. You're in a storm. Yeah, the point is, it's a dangerous thing to do, right? On the rocks, on the reefs, lost at sea, in a storm. And at the very best, you're going to fail to reach God's appointed harbor. You're going to miss out on the good stuff if you drift. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but your soul never drifts toward God. It always drifts away from God. You notice that? You put yourself in neutral, and you will go away from God. You won't go to God. And the longer the delay before you correct it, the further the drift and the harder it is. And so, here's the first thing. You need to determine a direction for your life, and as you begin this new year, 2020, decide on a fixed direction, and don't be a spiritual drifter. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever taken the time to write down some spiritual goals? I mean, some God-given spiritual goals. And by the way, if you've done that, thank you so much. If you've done that, let me I've been saying this recently quite a bit. A goal without a plan is just a dream. You need to write that one down. A goal without a plan is just a dream. But have you ever written any of those down? We can be a ship without a rudder. We can be a ship without a compass. We can be a ship without a sail. We can be a ship without an anchor. So how can you tell? How can you tell that your goal is a God-given goal? Some of you have made resolutions. Don't raise your hand. Some of you have said, in 2020, I'm going to lose X amount of weight. Some of you have said, in 2020, I'm going to be more committed financially. I'm going to. Some of you have said, in 2020, I'm going to be kinder to these people or those people. And you've made these resolutions. Maybe you've made some spiritual goals or resolutions for 2020. If you haven't, that's a good idea. Some of you may have said, I'm going to read the Bible through in 2020. If you haven't done it, you need to. It's a cool thing to do. But how can you tell that your goal is a God-given goal? Again, glad you asked. Let me give you a few tests to help you. First of all, can you pray over it? This is a God-given goal. Can I pray over this? Can you ask God to bless it? Can you ask God with joy in your heart as you ask God to bless it? So there's a test. Is your goal a goal that you can pray over? And then does it create in you a spiritual excitement? I mean, do you have a spiritual enthusiasm about that goal? Because, by the way, you're going to need that in order for you to see it fulfilled. But number three, does it demand the very best in you? Now think about that. Because the truth is, God demands and deserves the very best in all of us. And you've set a goal. Well, does that goal demand the very best in you? And number four, listen to this one. Does it touch every area of your life? Because here's the reason why. There is no area of your life that God is not concerned with. Somebody get this morning. There's somebody in this room that needs to know there's no area in your life that God's not concerned with. And you may think he's not concerned. You may think it's a menial thing in your life, but yet God is concerned about it all. And so as you're setting goals, spiritual goals, does it touch every area of your life? See, sociologists have found that 95% of people have never written any goals. So I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of us in this room this morning have not written down, clarified, distinctly written down goals, spiritual goals. 95%, they say, have never written any goals, but of the 5% that do have written goals, 95% of the 5% have reached their goals. In 1953 in Yale University, they found out that 3% of the students had written specific goals. And in 1975, they determined that the 3% had achieved more than the other 97% of the students at Yale put together. There's some power in that. You have a goal. So you have a vision. Hebrews tells us to be careful that we don't become a drifter. So the first thing I want you to get is to decide a fixed direction in 2020. Decide a fixed direction. What is it going to be? And then there's something else. determine a focused discipline. In verse 3, listen to what he said. How? How will we escape if we neglect so great salvation? So here's the reason. Direction without discipline is a joke. Direction without, no ship is going to get into the harbor unless it's brought into the harbor. A ship doesn't decide to do that on its own. It doesn't happen by neglect. It's going to take discipline. The antithesis of discipline is neglect. And most of us are pretty good at that. I read something the other day. You don't have to floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep. So here the writer of Hebrews says, he speaks of this great salvation. How, he says, will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? What makes this salvation great anyway? Glad you ask. It's great in its conception. Verse 3, listen, after it was at the first spoken through the Lord. This salvation was not conceived by Congress. This salvation was not instituted by Parliament. This salvation in its conception comes from the throne room of God himself. No other religion can say that. This salvation was conceived in God. But also it's great in its confirmation. Notice in verse 3, it was confirmed to us by those who heard it. And what he's saying is what we believe has lasted these many 2,000 and some years. People who walk with Jesus said it's real. And they told others, and those who were told others, and those who told others, and those who told them, and then others were told, and the gospel message has gone forward, and now we today in 2020 are telling people about a faith that stands on solid evidence. But listen to this, it's also great in its cost. Look at verse 9. But we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus. This is Jesus. And because of the suffering and death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Why did Jesus die? Let me tell you, he died so that you might have this great salvation. That's why. The other day I was listening to a man talk about real estate. Not really, but he came into my shop. He was a man who assessed the value of property. That's what he did. He was an assessor. And I asked him, listen, for you, what's the key to the worth of a piece of property? And I expected the answer that I heard. He said, of course, it's whatever a person is willing to pay for it. That's the value. And we all know that that's true. But get this, you ought to be getting ready. I want you to get ready to shout. I want you to be ready any second now. Because if that's true, and it typically is, what that means to you and I is that you and I must be worth something if Jesus was willing to pay that much for you and me. Don't run around saying you're made of junk and you're no good and you can't do this and you can't do that. And, oh, I've messed it all up in 2019. I made all of these mistakes and man, I've messed up my life and all the other people's life and I'm just no good and I'm not worthy. And the fact is you're not worthy. But Jesus said, you're worth enough for me to die for you. That's proof of how much we're worth. He tasted death, Hebrews said, for every man. And then the Bible asks this question, how will we escape if we neglect so great salvation? How will we escape? Now, here's what you need to get. He's not talking about neglecting being saved. This message was not going out to the masses who were lost and without Christ. He's talking to saved people like you and me. He's talking to people that used to be faithful members of the church. What he's saying is, how are you going to escape if you neglect this great salvation? Faithful members of this church who have neglected that salvation, that great salvation that they have because they don't show up anymore. They don't come. They don't go anywhere. And there are folks you know, and they're in your mind right now, who wouldn't think of possibly missing a gathering of God's people on a morning worship service. They wouldn't miss Bible study. They're going to come to prayer meeting, and they're not doing that now. They're neglecting this great salvation. People who used to be faithful in tithing and witnessing and prayer meetings, but somewhere along the way started drifting. This just happens so innocently. I mean, it's just most of the time you're not even aware. But somewhere along the way you end up drifting, and you're going to end up on the rocks. You're not going to escape. I'm not saying you're going to be lost. I'm not saying you're going to spend eternity in hell. If you're saved, you're always saved. What I am saying is you're missing this great salvation, and you're going to end up on the rocks. You might not even know you're drifting. The Bible says you and I won't escape. We might think we'll escape, but we won't. Listen, if we drift, we're headed for danger. 2020 can be the year for direction. 2020 can be the year for discipline. But there's one more thing I want you to get. We need a firm devotion. Notice in chapter 6, verse 19, this hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil. Verse 20, notice, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. What does that mean? He's still talking about the sea. He says we have an anchor. Now, the anchor is a symbol of our Christian faith. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but there are 3 symbols that have come to us from antiquity. Christian symbols. One is the cross. Now, you understand that one, right? Another is the fish. You've seen that on the back of people's bumpers. Some of you are going, I don't quite get that one. The fish. It's a Greek acronym for this phrase, Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. And the first letter in each word of that phrase spells out the Greek word for fish. That's where we get it. And there's a little more to it, but that's enough. But there's a third, and that's the anchor. In ancient days, it was a symbol of safety. Christians adopted this symbol as a symbol of hope. And what he's saying is this: in order to keep from drifting, we need this anchor of hope that grips the solid rock of truth that's connected to this cable of faith. And that word for hope, by the way, here is a Greek word, elphus. And by the way, I didn't say Elvis. He's not in the building. It means an anchor rope. There's kind of a play on words here in the scripture, and the writer of Hebrews gives us this little twist. Which anchor rope we have is vitally important. When this was written, you have to understand they didn't have those big engines running those ships. They depended on the elements, the tides and the winds. And by the way, the harbors were not dredged as our harbors are dredged. They could have been a mess, a dangerous mess. And so when they wanted to bring a ship into this dangerous harbor, they would put their anchor in a small boat. And the ship would stay offshore while that small boat would carry the anchor into the harbor. And in the harbor there would be this great huge rock somewhere embedded in the shore. And they would put one of the tines or one of the points of the anchor into one of those great massive rocks. Now they've already put the anchor in the harbor, but the ship's still out in the open waters. They had a name for the person who puts the anchor in the harbor. This is going to blow you away. You ready? He was called the forerunner. Think about this. He was called the forerunner. He would take the anchor in a little boat and he would put it in the rock that's located in the harbor, and at just the right time, when the tide was right, they would pull that mighty ship into the harbor. Now listen to this verse again, verse 19. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul. A hope both sure, it says, and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil. Now he's talking about the Holy of Holies in heaven. And verse 20, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever. Now, did you get that? Jesus, as our forerunner, has taken this anchor of hope and he's latched it into the throne of God. He's already there. He said, I'm going and I'm preparing a place for you. And if I go to prepare that place for you, I'm coming to get you. He's already there. And you and I as believers, we're connected to him with that anchor. I can't see the anchor, can you? I can't see it. But I got to tell you, I can feel the tug. Can't you? I need an anchor. Jesus Christ is the forerunner. He's gone and placed the anchor in the throne room of God. And for everyone who knows him, he's bringing us safely into this dangerous harbor, and he's guiding us safely into this dangerous harbor through the storms, through the difficulties, through the pain, through all the garbage of our lives, and he's pulling us safely. I don't know about you, but you got to get ready to shout a little bit about that. Because this is true. Our anchor holds. And every day he's inching us closer to the harbor. So what do you need in 2020? We need some direction. We need some discipline and we need devotion because our anchor holds and there's hope for those who are connected through Jesus Christ.
Hi, I'm Katie.
And I'm Jacob.
And we are My Anchor Holds. And the message that we want to share with you is simply this. Life is a medley of all these different things. Prayers, praises, doubts, fears, joys, yearning. All these things pulling our lives in different directions.
But through it all, we believe at the core of our being that God is our anchor, our creator, our constant, and we can always find ourselves in him.
When I float on an angry, rolling sea, let my prayer always be between the joys and fears and folds. God is my anchor, and my anchor holds.